Alexey Muraviev, who's an associate professor at National Security and Strategic Studies at Curtin University. He joins us now live from Perth in Australia. Thank you so much, Professor, for joining us here on the program. Now, we are seeing that President Biden is under immense pressure from politicians in his country to do more, indicating that they should implement a no-fly zone. And we heard Zelensky request that no-fly zone again in his speech yesterday. But that doesn't seem like it's going to happen at any point really in this conflict.
No, it doesn't. And there are several reasons for that. First of all, I don't think the Americans are ready to risk the lives of their servicemen and their servicewomen for the conflict that they may be involved politically, and obviously they look at it as a proxy war with Russia, but not something that directly affects their immediate security or strategic interests. So one thing is to provide much needed supplies and political and economic support to work on Ukraine. Another thing is committing your own army to confront a large army and, more importantly, a nuclear armed power. And I don't think the Americans are psychologically, perhaps not militarily, but certainly psychologically ready to do that. The second point here is that NATO is not united on that front. There is no consensus in NATO about committing direct military force to the Ukraine conflict. So if the United States will risk an escalation, they will risk an escalation that would affect European security, not just the security of Ukraine. And I think this is where NATO has a bit of a cold feet. So I think even though the United States has the final word of say in the framework of this transatlantic alliance, they have to factor in the European feelings.
What do you make of President Biden calling Putin a war criminal? How is this back and forth exchange going to affect the conflict?
Well, it's not going to affect the conflict. It's going to affect any prospect of a state-to-state dialogue post-conflict, because wars end up in some sort of political resolution one way or another, you know. And as long as Putin remains Russia's president, there's going to be a need, a requirement to talk to him, whether other heads of state, and certainly the president of the United States, wants it or not. Russia is a permanent member of the United Nations Security Council, is a nuclear superpower. It is involved in too many international mechanisms. And obviously Biden, whilst obviously being under immense pressure and being accused of being too soft on Russia and Russia's aggression and confronting Putin, also from his former arch-rival Donald Trump, well, he's obviously making things more difficult, because it will only antagonize Putin and not so much alienate Putin, and Putin will make the Ukrainians pay for that rather than will make Biden pay for it, because for him, an attack on Ukraine is not just an attack on a sovereign neighbor. It's a lesson to the United States. It's a message to the United States.
Right, and there's also been a back-and-forth exchange of sanctions between the EU, particularly in Russia this week, and we're now hearing that the Kremlin are going to be imposing personal sanctions on the leaders of unfriendly countries. What do you think that would look like?
Look, I mean, the Russians had to respond one way or another. Putin has to show to the Russians that he is actually doing something, that Russia is not on the receiving end, rather than it retaliates, and it has already retaliated in a number of ways, like shutting down its airspace to a number of Western airlines, suspending certain activities with regards, for example, providing services to launch satellites into space, etc., etc. Obviously, it's not helping, because you'll still need to have a political dialogue happening one way or another. Otherwise, the conflict will drag on, and when people don't talk to one another, even if they cannot stand each other, in a situation of a risk of a nuclear conflict, in a situation of a risk this regional war turning into a global war, this risk only increases, because when you don't talk to an adversary, you enhance the risk of miscalculation, misunderstanding the actions of the opponent. So it is not helping, obviously.
All right, Professor Alexey Muraviev, thank you so much for joining us here on Tier 2 World and sharing that information with us.